Ashley Hall was an ordinary teenage girl. She resided in Warwick Square, Darlington, with her mother and siblings. She had been a brownie and a girl guide, loved animals, and enjoyed playing her music at full volume. Her room was decorated in pink, with pictures of friends, family, and loved ones adorning the walls. She was talkative, approachable, and sociable. Her mother, Andrea, considered her her best friend. It had been just the two of them for 11 years, and when Andrea had 3 more daughters, Ashley took on a motherly role, helping raise them. She loved them deeply, and the 4 of them shared a strong bond. After finishing her GCSEs, Ashley left school and enrolled at Darlington College to train as a nursery nurse. She was close to her friends and would often use the money her mother gave her for chores to chat with them on the phone or online. She frequently texted and called them, also staying connected through MSN Messenger. On Facebook, Ashley came across a picture of a young man named Peter Cartwright. They started chatting, and he showered her with compliments and kind words. She was flattered by his attention and agreed to meet him in person. Although he didn't show up for their first meeting, they rescheduled for 2 days later. Cartwright told her that his father would pick her up. On Sunday, October 25, 2009, Ashley received a text. "Hi, hun. It's Pete's dad. Are you sure you don't mind me picking you up? Pete is really looking forward to seeing you. And yes, it's okay for you to stay." Ashley replied, "No, it's fine, I don't mind. I trust him, so I trust you and thank you." She then received another message. "My dad's on his way, babe. He says excuse the state of him, lol. He doesn't have to come in and meet your mom, does he, lol? He'll be a mess probably, lol. Oh, and you're wearing some sexy underwear for me?" She replied, "Hey, babe. And no, he doesn't have to, lol. It's okay, what car has he got? And you will have to wait and see, won't you?" Ashley told her mother she was going to stay with one of her friends from college, and that her friend's father would pick her up. Her mother made her promise that she would be home by 10:30 a.m. the following day. She said she would, and with that, she left. As the next day rolled around, Ashley still hadn't made contact. Andrea had tried to call her daughter 30 times, but it just kept going to voicemail. Andrea's mother tried to contact her too, but she was also met with silence. They carried on calling her throughout the day. Then at 7 p.m., the phone was finally answered. Andrea could hear people talking in the background, but nobody spoke into the phone. She repeatedly called out her daughter's name, but there was no response from whoever had answered. She rang the phone again, and this time a man picked up. She said, "Who the hell are you?" The man on the other end of the phone asked who she was. Andrea replied, "I want to know who has my daughter's phone." He then said he was a police chief inspector. He explained that a man had been arrested for a driving offense and had been in possession of Ashley's phone. The chief inspector said he would call her back. Andrea said she felt sick, panicked, and confused. Andrea put the call out on Facebook for any information saying, "Ring me immediately if you know where Ashley is." The friend Ashley had said she would be staying with got in touch. She hadn't seen her and Ashley had not stayed at her house. 11:30 p.m. There was a knock on Andrea's front door. It was 2 police officers. They asked her to sit down as they had some terrible news to share with her. They had found a body. The body needed to be formally identified, so Andrea's father went to the morgue to carry out the devastating task. He confirmed it was Ashley Hall. He said, "It was the hardest thing I've had to do in my life. It is something no granddad should have to do." She had been raped, and her arms and legs had been tied up, and tape was put over her face. Her body was then dumped against a fence near Old Stockton Road. The first post-mortem to establish how she had died was inconclusive. The second one revealed she had died from smothering. After her body was found, Ashley's family looked on her computer and found that she had been having conversations with a man they didn't know. It was the man who had been arrested for the traffic offenses. His name was Peter Chapman, and he had a terrifying history of offending. Peter Chapman had been born in January 1977 and was looked after by his grandparents in Stockton. Those who knew him in school said he was strange from a young age. It wasn't long before he was on the radar of police. When he was just 15 years old, In 1992, he was investigated over an allegation of sexual assault. In May 1996, he committed 2 horrifying rapes against sex workers in Teesside. The violence had increased, and he had also used a knife in the attacks. He was sentenced to serve 7 years in a young offenders institution. The judge described him as clearly a danger to women. He served half of his sentence before being released and was now a registered sex offender, meaning there were conditions on his freedom. He would later move to Middlesbrough and lived on Martin Road. The attacks would begin again. He used a stolen car with a fake registration plate to pick up a woman, before holding her at knife point and sexually assaulting her. 2 days later, he did the same thing and picked up a woman before driving 24 miles to a disused railway track in County Durham. She too was attacked at knife point. This was where Chapman made a mistake. He told his second victim how he had attacked a woman just 2 days before. His victim went to the police and reported him. The investigating officers linked this attack to the one from 2 days prior, and the first victim was able to pick Chapman out of a lineup. In 2001, Peter Chapman was released from prison and moved to Merseyside. Just 1 year later, Cheshire police were investigating an allegation of kidnap and rape that a sex worker had made, and Peter Chapman was arrested again. However, the case would be discontinued. In June, he moved again, this time to the city of Bristol. He would be arrested, but this time for deception offenses. But before long, he was back in custody for another sexual assault. He had been arrested by police in Liverpool on suspicion of the kidnap and rape of a sex worker. He had got her into his car on the agreement of sex for £60, and because he appeared to be friendly, she agreed to go to a flat with him. Detective Inspector Mick Callan said she told police that at first she didn't feel threatened because of his manner. Once they arrived, the encounter took a terrifying turn. He held her at knife point and kept her tied up for 14 hours where she was subjected to an appalling series of sexual assaults. He had tied her hands together and taped over her mouth. He used a 12-inch knife to threaten her. After raping her, he told her that he was sorry and that he hadn't meant to hurt her. He would then rape her again. He made her get back into his car and then left her near to where he had picked her up. She went to the police, and based on the description of the flat she was able to give, Peter Chapman was arrested. He was charged, but the case would once again be discontinued. The woman he had attacked was too traumatized to face him in court, and the case collapsed. Peter Chapman would be downgraded to a medium-risk offender when he had previously been considered high risk. After he continued to miss appointments, he was recalled to prison in 2004 and spent another 15 months behind bars. Upon his release, he enrolled in a computer course. In December 2007, he befriended a single mother in Runcorn who had a young baby and was unaware of his status as a sex offender. He had not complied with the conditions of being a registered sex offender and moved in with the woman and her child. When she found out about his past, she kicked him out. In 2009, a warrant was issued for his arrest after he fled from a hit and run that left a woman with a broken arm. But he was able to evade capture and moved again. After moving to the Thames Valley, he struck up a friendship with another woman. Whilst there, he had a falling out with one of her neighbors. The neighbor's house would later be set on fire. Soon after the fire, Chapman was gone. He also took a stolen laptop with him. He used the woman from Runcorn's details to purchase a car on eBay, and by October, he was back in Teesside. He was living in a roadside hotel. He then started talking to Ashley Hall on Facebook to avoid her not getting into the car. When she saw that it was him and not the person she had been talking to, he devised a plan. Using 2 different phones, he told her that Peter Cartwright's father would be the one to collect her, just down the street from her home. His plan worked. After picking her up, he drove to Thorpe Larchers, close to Sedgefield. One of Ashley's friends, Gemma, had been texting her while she was in the car with Chapman. The conversation had been fine, with Gemma saying it didn't feel like anything was wrong. It just felt normal, but they were really late replies. She said Ashley's behavior had been out of character. When we found out she had met this man, it just didn't seem like her at all. It was totally different to anything she had done. He must have made her feel so special for her to go and meet him. Really, really special. Whilst with Chapman, Ashley was subjected to a brutal sexual assault. He then bound her up and put tape across her face. He told the police that he had killed her after an argument had got out of control. When forensics went through his car, they found more incriminating evidence. Her mobile phone, some screwed-up duct tape, and some tape with Ashley's hair stuck to it. They also found a used condom. Durham police would later say that had he not said anything after being arrested for the traffic offense, they likely would have crushed the car. It wasn't just his car that provided clues. His digital footprint also revealed a lot. He had various fake profiles across at least 9 different sites. One fake profile he had set up had nearly 3,000 friends. All of them were female, and the ages ranged from 31 to just 13 years old. His email account showed that on the day he had contacted Ashley, 100 young girls had also accepted his friend request. After adding somebody as a friend, he would then try and get them to use private chat rooms where the conversations would become sexual and explicit. He had attempted to meet 2 15-year-old girls, and one of them agreed to meet in A, B, and Q car park in Hartlepool. When she approached and saw him sitting in the car, she ran away. Several days later, he had tried to meet another girl in Stockton, but she didn't turn up. The day after murdering Ashley, Chapman was due to meet another woman, but his registration number was spotted by the AMPR system and he was arrested on the A177. In November, hundreds of people came together for Ashley's funeral at St. Cuthbert's Church. As the bell rang at 3 p.m., Andrea led mourners into the church. There weren't enough seats for everybody, and the community was united in its grief. When the service was finished, her coffin was taken to a private cremation service. Her mother said, "I didn't want Ashley to be buried in the cold ground. Her favorite place was home, so I keep her ashes here." In January 2010, Peter Chapman pleaded not guilty to the kidnap, rape, and murder of Ashley Hall. The night before his trial was due to start, Peter Chapman changed his plea to guilty. Andrea had decided to attend court and look Peter Chapman in the eyes. She said, "People say to me, 'How do you feel?' I don't really know. Empty and angry are the words that sum it up best." Prosecutor Graham Reed's QC said, after inventing the fake teenage Peter, he now decided to invent Peter's dad in order to persuade Ashley that it was safe to get into his car. The plan he devised was calculated and wicked, and it worked. At Teesside Crown Court on the March 8, 2010, Judge Peter Fox sentenced Peter Chapman to life in prison with a minimum term of 35 years for the rape and murder of Ashley Hall. The judge told him he had been a very great danger to women for a considerable time. He said that Chapman had undertaken a significant degree of planning to carry out his appalling crime. He said, "This was an evil scheme, very carefully brought and with considerable detail to trap your victim. For what it's worth, I cannot foresee your release," he said. Not long after his sentence, it was revealed that Peter Chapman had been attacked in HMP Franklin, the Category A prison where he is being held. He suffered multiple cuts to the face after being assaulted, but recovered in the hospital wing of the prison. Following Ashley's death, the Home's Secretary Alan Johnson said that lessons needed to be learned from her case. He said that authorities in both the United States and United Kingdom were working to find ways to flag up when a convicted sex offender uses the internet. He said, "What our people in the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Agency do is go online themselves to try and lure these people in. Whether we can get the technology to flag up when they're online is something we need to look at." He also called on the police to answer questions about how Peter Chapman had been monitored. The Independent Police Complaints Commission, commonly referred to as the IPCC, announced that it was going to be investigating how Merseyside police had monitored Peter Chapman after the force had referred themselves to the watchdog. It emerged that 9 months had passed between the police and Merseyside realizing he was no longer there, and them issuing a national wanted notice for him in September 2009. This was 1 month before he murdered Ashley. A spokesperson for Merseyside police said he didn't know why the wanted notice didn't go out sooner. The IPCC said that when Chapman moved in May 2005, he came under a different sex offender unit, and he should have been visited every 3 months. A period of 9 months would pass between visits. He was visited by one female police officer who had to use her own car due to low staffing levels. She had not received proper training on how to monitor sex offenders despite repeatedly asking for said training. The unit was described as poorly organized and was the only one in the force that was not a stand-alone unit. When details of Chapman's car were circulated on the police national computer following his failure to adhere to the conditions of being a registered sex offender, 3 police forces recorded hits on their AMPR systems between 23 October 26th. IPCC Commissioner Nassim Malik said, "It is evident from our investigation that this particular sex offender unit was inadequately resourced, and as a result, the officer tasked with managing sex offenders in the community had an impossible task. Chapman was not monitored effectively and managed to slip away with terrible consequences. I fully appreciate that irrespective of the failings in monitoring, Chapman may well have enacted his plan anyway. Only 24-hour-a-day monitoring could ensure prevention of such acts. My deepest sympathies go out to Ashley Hall's family for their loss. Their grief can only be compounded by the evident police failings that have been uncovered surrounding the man who murdered Ashley." Andrea repeatedly begged Facebook to remove Ashley's profile. They only did so when police lodged a complaint via the United States Embassy. Following the murder of Ashley Hall, Darlington Council created information packs and software to educate young people about online safety. Darlington Council's cabinet member for children and young people said, "Ashley has left a lasting legacy. Ashley Hall was a 17-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her. In the words of her mother, she was loving, honest, caring, and well-liked. Everybody loved her. She was a person who brought light into the lives of others." Maureen Brewbaker was born on July 4, 1954, and everyone expected her to be a firecracker due to her patriotic birthday. This prediction proved to be true, with her mother, Mary, and later describing her as the wild child of the family. As the oldest of 7 children, Moreen was a devoted and loving sister to her 4 brothers and 2 sisters. One of her earliest memories, as shared by her sister Lisa, who was 13 years younger, was sitting on Maureen's lap in a car while Maureen's husband drove them around one evening. Maureen was trying to teach Lisa how to sing the Christmas carol Silver Bells as it played on the radio. Maureen often babysat her younger siblings for her parents, who found managing so many young children challenging. To encourage good behavior, they would offer the younger ones 10 cents each if they behaved well for their sister while they were out. Even if the younger children fought or misbehaved, Maureen always reported back to her parents that they had all behaved wonderfully so that everyone could get their dime. Though Maureen was very close with her family, she also exhibited typical teenage behavior in that she didn't always follow her parents' advice. At 16, Maureen asked her parents if she could marry her boyfriend, David Farley. Although they disapproved of the idea, Maureen and David married anyway. Maureen's parents could have asked the court to annul the marriage, but Maureen threatened to leave home and never speak to them again if they did, so they did not pursue that option. Shortly after the marriage, Maureen's husband David was arrested. Police have not publicly disclosed what he was charged with, but the Brewbakers believe he was arrested for burglary. David was sent to the Anamosa State Penitentiary outside of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to serve his short sentence. Maureen moved to Cedar Rapids so she could visit her husband while he was incarcerated. Her younger siblings were upset by the move, as Cedar Rapids was on the opposite side of the state as their home in Sioux City. Maureen rented a room in Cedar Rapids and found a job nearby as a waitress at Waite's restaurant. She wrote letters and sent photos to her family regularly and called them when she had the money to. On September 17, 1971, Maureen borrowed some money to buy a pack of cigarettes. Her paycheck from the restaurant will be ready later that day, so she would quickly be able to pay back the money. However, she never came to the restaurant that night to collect the paycheck she so desperately needed as she was out of money. She likewise did not arrive at the restaurant for her shift on Monday 20th, which was unusual for the dependable employee. Her co-workers were worried about her, so they went to her rented room to see if she was there. She was not, so they reported Maureen missing to the police. Police in Cedar Rapids contacted their counterparts in Sioux City to have them check if Maureen had simply gone to visit her family. When the police arrived at the Brewbaker family home, they asked if Maureen was there and informed the family she was missing when they learned she was not at the house. Maureen's father was unable to get off work, and her mother had to stay to care for her youngest children. The two of Maureen's siblings made the 4-hour drive to Cedar Rapids to help look for her. Moreen would not be found until a week after she was last seen alive. On September 24, 1971, two teenage boys were out hunting in a wooded area approximately 3 miles away from Maureen's rented room. In the bed of an abandoned truck in a wooded ravine near what was then a landfill and is now Tate Cummins Park, they saw a woman lying down with one leg propped up. She was wearing clothes but no shoes. The two boys assumed she was sleeping and continued on their way. When they passed by the area again, however, they noticed that the woman in the truck was in the exact same position she had been in when they saw her earlier. They decided to approach the truck to get a closer look. When they did, they saw that the woman's skin was discolored and realized she was dead. The woman in the truck was Maureen Brewbaker Farley. She was just 17 years old at the time of her death. Moreen had been struck in the head, which had resulted in a severe skull fracture. Based on the level of decomposition, authorities believe Moreen had not died until several days after she sustained the injury. She would have been unconscious during the time between the injury and her death. There were also indications that she had been sexually assaulted. Police believed Moreen had been killed elsewhere and then later placed in the truck. When police began investigating the murder, they found no signs of struggle inside of Maureen's rented room, and her car was still parked outside. They conducted interviews but were never able to make an arrest. Maureen's killer would remain unidentified for decades until advances in science and technology provided new uses for evidence preserved in the case. In 2006, cold case investigators submitted a swab taken from Maureen's body to the lab to see if there was any unknown DNA present. A full DNA profile from an unknown male was developed from semen found on the swab, but there was no match to the profile in criminal databases. The case was looked at once again in 2017, and investigators began collecting DNA samples from suspects who had been identified in the early days of the investigation to compare their DNA to the DNA found on Maureen's body. More than 15 suspects were cleared through this effort. Police could not collect a DNA sample from one major suspect because he had died in 2013 at the age of 94. The man in question had worked at a liquor store near the restaurant where Moreen had worked and was a regular customer of hers there. He reportedly was friendly to her and offered to help her with her car. Maureen's mother, Mary Ann, had written to police 6 months after her daughter's murder, telling them that she believed he was the person who had killed Moreen. Police were also suspicious of this man. He had been interviewed extensively but had refused to take a polygraph. He had continued to visit the police station in the months after Maureen's murder, asking about the investigation. Police found the suspicious but had no evidence to show he was responsible for Maureen's murder. That changed in the spring of 2021 when police were able to obtain a search warrant, allowing them to collect a DNA sample from the man's daughter for comparison to the male DNA found on Maureen's body. The sample was collected and sent to the lab. On September 24, 2021, 50 years to the day after Maureen's body was discovered, police received the results of the analysis from the lab. Testing confirmed that the DNA found on Maureen's body had come from the father of the woman whose DNA had been submitted, the man the Brewbaker family had long suspected, George M. Smith. Maureen's father passed away in 2002. 2 of Maureen's brothers also passed away before learning who killed their sister. Maureen's mother and 4 surviving siblings are satisfied with the evidence and the formal closure of the case. While Smith may not have had to face justice in this life, Maureen's mother believes he will still face consequences and is relieved she and her family have some measure of closure. "We just figure he'll suffer in hell for it," Mary and Brewbaker told the Sioux City Journal. "What's done is done, and at least we know it was him and we can quit wondering. We can let it go." On Thursday, June 9, 1977, 17-year-old Eric Goldstrand and 16-year-old Liana Edank went out for a day of fishing and swimming at the Broken Bowl picnic grounds near Fall Creek, Oregon. The high school sweethearts were on summer break from North Eugene High School in Eugene, Oregon, where they each had a close group of friends. The couple drove east on Highway 58 in Eric's truck with the picnic lunch Eric's mother had prepared for them. The couple was supposed to be home by 10 o'clock that night, but they did not arrive as scheduled. Earlier in the evening, Eric had called home to tell his father he was having problems with the truck. He asked him to come looking for him if he and Liana did not arrive home one time. Eric's parents, Ted and Donna, therefore, then drove out to the picnic area. There, they located the truck, but not Eric and Liana. Their clothes were inside of the truck, so Ted and Donna knew that wherever their son and his girlfriend were, they were only dressed in their swimsuits. Eric's parents then notified law enforcement, and a Lane County Sheriff's deputy arrived on the scene to help search for the two missing teenagers. The deputy and Ted went out to search while Donna stayed behind with the truck. They located Liana's body in a secluded area within the picnic grounds. She had been raped and then shot. Ted took Donna home for the evening, telling her the search would resume in the morning. He did not tell her that Liana had been found dead and that the picnic area was now a crime scene. The next morning, Eric's parents were notified that Eric's body had also been found several hours after Liana was located. His body was found in a group of bushes and he had also been shot. An extensive investigation was launched to find Liana and Eric's killer. A massive search was held and roadblocks went up throughout the area in the immediate aftermath of the murders. Numerous interviews were performed and polygraph examinations were administered. Several bullets and suspect firearms were examined. Fingerprints were found at the scene, but at the time, no match could be found to them. Despite ongoing efforts, no arrests were made in the case. Detective Ken West was first assigned to work Liana and Eric's case in 1983. He later retired and began volunteering one day a week with the Lane County Sheriff's Office cold case team, working alongside Chuck Tilda, who had retired after 3 decades with the Eugene Police Department, and Kirk Engdahl, a retired state and federal prosecutor. DNA evidence had been found and preserved at the crime scene, but there was little investigators could do with it in 1977. Decades later, however, this would be the evidence that finally identified the young couple's killer. In July of 2020, the DNA from the scene was run again, and Parbon Nanolabs was brought in to analyze the profile. They were able to generate an image of what the killer may have looked like based on his DNA. They also used genetic genealogy to try to identify him based on his relatives. They ultimately determined that the killer was most likely one of 3 members of a family from Oak Ridge, Oregon. Only one of these family members was still local. Investigators were able to surreptitiously collect the butt of a cigarette he had smoked, and the DNA found on it eliminated him as a suspect. This left 2 brothers, who were then living in Mesa, Arizona, as potential suspects. Authorities in Oregon began arranging to collect their DNA and bring the case to a grand jury once they conclusively determined which brother was their suspect. However, on February 24, 2021, the 2 brothers got into an altercation. The younger of the brothers was injured during the fight, and the police were called. Before they arrived on the scene, the older brother took his own life. While he will never know for sure, Kurt West suspects that the older brother may have ended his life rather than come in contact with the police, in part because his involvement in Liana and Eric's murders and the DNA he had left at the scene may have still been at the back of his mind. The surviving brother cooperated with police, answering questions about his older brother. Delays in the final DNA testing went on for months, but on September 23, 2021, more than 44 years after Liana and Eric were killed, the Lane County Sheriff's Office announced that the DNA found at the crime scene belonged to Ronald Albert Troy. Troy had been 23 years old at the time of the murders and had recently been discharged from the military. He was a Lane County resident in 1977 but left Oregon in the early 1980s, eventually moving to Mesa in 2008. It's a relief he's not going to be able to hurt anyone again. But there's a part of us who wanted to see him and know why. And all these things we're never going to know, Liana's cousin, Kathy Kloster, said after Troy's identification. Eric's mother, Donna, does see a silver lining in Troy's suicide as she was terrified of having to go through a trial and what could happen if Troy somehow managed to get acquitted. The DNA testing performed in the case by the Cold Case Unit was funded with donations made to the unit by the public. Liana and Eric's families are grateful to the investigators who never gave up on the case. They hope the resolution of the case will give hope to other families still waiting for answers in cold cases and serve as a reminder to criminals that while they may not have been caught yet, they may still one day have police come knocking on their door. In July of 1991, 17-year-old Patricia Moreno, known to her loved ones as Tricia, was in the care of the Department of Social Services. She had been living in one of their foster homes on Henry Street in Malden, Massachusetts for the past 2 months. Tricia's foster mother did not allow smoking inside the home, so Tricia would often go out onto the third-floor apartment's fire escape to smoke cigarettes. The fire escape is where Tricia would be found at approximately 3 a.m. on July 20th, having been shot in the head. Tricia was rushed to Massachusetts General Hospital, where she died as a result of her injuries 12 hours later. An arrest in Tricia's case would not be made for 30 years. On September 29, 2021, Middlesex County District Attorney Marion Ryan announced that a grand jury had returned an indictment for first-degree murder and that 48-year-old Rodney Daniels of South Fulton, Georgia, had been charged in connection with Tricia's murder. He had been arrested without incident at his home in Georgia on September 27th and would be extradited back to Massachusetts. Daniels had been dating one of the 2 teenage daughters of Tricia's foster mother and sometimes stayed at their apartment. In 1991, he told police that he had been asleep on an armchair in the apartment's living room when he was awoken by 2 gunshots. He went out onto the fire escape where he found Tricia, critically injured. Tricia's foster mother then called 911. Police learned that Daniels had been aggressive and threatening towards Tricia during her time in the foster home. According to court documents, Tricia had reported that she had awoken one night shortly before her death to Daniels standing in her bedroom. He had a gun in his hand, which he then pointed at Tricia's head. Tricia's foster mother never reported this to the police or to the Department of Social Services. These same documents detail accounts of Daniels bragging about the police failing to find gunpowder residue on him and telling Tricia's foster mother, "Yes, you can," after she said that a person could not get away with murder. Police were able to confirm that Daniels had been in possession of multiple handguns prior to Tricia's murder. In 2020, Tricia's case was re-examined by the Middlesex District Attorney's Office Cold Case Unit, which had been formed the year before. They returned to the apartment where Tricia had been killed and meticulously recreated the crime scene. They determined, based on the angle of the bullet that killed Tricia, that her killer had fired the fatal shot near the door back into the apartment she had been living in. In addition, investigators were able to locate a witness who had just returned to the United States after an extended period of time outside of the country. He had lived in a second-floor apartment in 1991 and had been awoken by the gunshots when Tricia was killed. Because of the location of his bed in his bedroom and the location of his window, when he woke up, he was looking directly out at the crime scene. He was able to provide police with a description of the man out on the fire escape with Tricia and, more importantly, he reported that he had seen the man go inside of Tricia's apartment after the shooting. There had been no signs of forced entry into the apartment, and no one who had been known to be inside of the apartment had reported seeing anyone else there. Tricia's foster sister, Chantel, who had been dating Daniels at the time of the murder, testified on his behalf at a 1991 grand jury hearing. However, in private, she told her younger sister, Rochelle, that on the night of the murder, Daniels had confessed to her that he had killed Tricia and then hid the gun in a hole in the chair where he slept in the living room. He told her later he had gotten rid of the weapon. Rochelle had begged Chantel to go to the police with his information throughout the years that followed, but Chantal never would. She feared getting into legal trouble for lying to the grand jury to protect Daniels originally. Chantal died of COVID-19 in 2020, and Rochelle told police about what Chantal had told her about the murder and her dishonesty during a 2021 interview with them, since Chantal could no longer face any legal consequences. Daniels was arraigned in Middlesex Superior Court on September 30th. He is being held without bail and is due back in court on October 21st. 16-year-old Rebecca Watts, known to most as Becky, had last been seen by her family the previous morning. She had left her home in Crown Hill, Bristol, taking only her tablet, phone, and laptop. She hadn't packed any extra clothes or mentioned where she was going, and she wasn't answering texts or calls. This was completely out of character for Becky. She had never acted this way before or stayed out too late. The day before, she had spoken to her friend, who said Becky seemed like her usual self, with no signs of anything being off. There was no indication that Becky had planned to run away. Born on June 3, 1998, to parents Darren and Tanya, Becky's early years were spent with her mother after her parents had split up. She was later taken into care due to concerns about neglect, but soon after, she and her brother Dan began living with their father. Becky was described as burly, feisty, and full of humor, confident in her own skin around those she trusted. At school, she was quieter and more reserved, but her teachers described her as incredibly kind, caring, and having a big heart. She had a small but tight-knit group of friends who loved her just as much as she adored them. Darren would later begin a relationship with a woman called Angie, who herself was a parent to a son called Nathan. When Darren and Angie married in 2013, Nathan had served as best man and Becky as a bridesmaid, along with Nathan's girlfriend, Shauna. Less than 2 years after their wedding day, their world had been turned upside down, and Becky was now missing. After calling 999, Becky's father made a desperate plea on Facebook, saying, "Please, if anyone has seen or heard from my daughter, just let me know she is safe." She went missing Thursday 19th at 11:15 a.m. to meet her boyfriend and never arrived, so he came here looking for her. She hasn't been seen since by any of her friends. Police have now started a search. "I'm really scared now. I want her home." Detective Chief Inspector Richard O'Cone said that what was alarming to police was that her social media had not been used. She was regularly in contact with her friendship group, but there had been no communication from her. The story was quickly picked up by the national media. The following day, on Wednesday, February 25th, her family was asked to leave the home so that a search could be done. But there was still no sign of her. Searches were also being undertaken by 6 teams in various locations, including an area of woodland and 3 houses. The College of Policing and National Crime Agency were drafted in to help, and a helicopter was deployed to help search from the air. The nature reserve at Troopers Hill and a local lake were searched as well, but she was nowhere to be found. The hashtag Find Becky was circulating around social media, and police took to Twitter to get the news out there about her disappearance. The investigating team needed to talk to those closest to Becky to try and ascertain her last known movements and find out any more information that was relevant. They were trying to build a picture of exactly who Becky was, hoping that the answers to their questions could be found. They spoke to Becky's stepmother, Angie. Shauna heard the door go, so she was assuming it was Becky going out. Yeah. So I'm assuming it was Becky going out. Okay. No one saw her go, but no. Just heard the door go, yeah. And this option that Becky had left. Yeah. As their inquiries continued, they found that the last people who had seen Becky had been her stepbrother Nathan Matthews and his girlfriend Shauna Hoare. They had initially been hard to pin down for an interview, but the officers were eventually able to get in touch with them and ask them to come to the station. Shauna gave her account of what had happened on the day Becky had last been seen. Nathan gave the same account about hearing the door slam. Several things stood out to investigators. Shauna appeared to be giggly and rather upbeat, and Nathan came across as unconcerned. Another thing that was unusual was just how much their stories aligned. Detective Chief Inspector Richard O'Cahan said that most people who witness or experience the same events may give accounts that have incorrect details or don't slot together neatly. He said that in this instance, the fact that their stories were so similar indicated they had spoken to each other beforehand and colluded to make sure their stories matched. Volunteers came out in droves to assist in the searches, posters were put up, and people were determined they were not going to stop looking until she was found. It had now been 9 days since Becky had last been seen. The police brought the major crime unit on board to assist in the investigation and turn their efforts back to Becky's house. They went in with the forensics unit to see if the house held any clues as to where she could be. They made a sinister discovery. Faint spots of blood were found on the door frame of Becky's bedroom. Fingerprints were found in the blood too. While tests were being carried out, they asked her stepbrother Nathan and his girlfriend Shauna to come back in for a second round of interviews. Shauna's statement that Nathan was finding the situation difficult varied from his. Despite the feelings of officers, they didn't have enough to hold him in custody. But this would soon all change. The results had come back from the fingerprint that had been found in the blood on Becky's door frame. It belonged to her stepbrother, Nathan Matthews. It would be several more hours before the results would be in on who the blood belonged to. They decided that if it came back as being Becky's blood, they would make an arrest straight away on suspicion of kidnap, and their worst fears were soon realized. The blood belonged to Becky. Saturday, February 28, 2015, Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare were taken into custody at a house in Bristol. Nathan was 10 years older than Becky and had known her since she was 2 years old when his mother started dating Darren. Darren's relationship with Nathan had been quite strained. Nathan didn't want anybody interfering with his and his mother's lives. Becky's brother Dan got along with Nathan. They would often play video games and spend time in each other's company, but Nathan didn't interact much with Becky. He also didn't live in the family home. He instead lived close by with his grandmother, but would often go over to see his mother and stepfamily. When Nathan was 19 years old, he had come to the house with 4 young girls in the back of his car, none of them appearing to be older than 12. Darren refused to let him bring them inside and told Nathan to take them all home immediately. In her teens, Becky had struggled with an eating disorder, and whilst her family were deeply concerned, Nathan flippantly dismissed her struggles, saying she was doing it for attention. She had become weaker and would also faint, but Nathan still said this was all for attention. After a year, Becky had made it through and recovered from her illness. In 2008, Nathan Matthews was now 21 years old and brought home his new girlfriend, Shauna Hoare. He had told his family she was 19 years old, but she wasn't. She was actually 15. Darren knew he was lying and told him to take Shauna home. Darren had fought hard to get his children out of the care of social services, and he was not going to jeopardize their stability in any way. Nathan and Shauna stayed together, however, and went on to have a daughter. Darren initially didn't like Shauna, saying there was something about her that he couldn't put his finger on. After they were arrested, they were taken to the police station to be questioned again. After allowing Nathan to talk freely, building his confidence in answering their questions, they changed strategy and questioned him in a more direct way. They were also talking to Shauna about her version of events. A forensics team was then sent to Shauna and Nathan's home. The house was in disarray. Every room was filled with items, clutter, and mess. As the search moved throughout the property, one part of the upstairs floor immediately stood out. Going into the bathroom, the left-hand side of the room was much the same as the rest of the property. But the bathtub was spotless. It was shiny and extremely clean, and this meant it didn't fit in with the rest of the home. As the questioning continued, the officers decided not to tell either of them what the latest developments were or what evidence they now had. Over the next 2 days, the forensics team continued to search the house that Nathan and Shauna lived in, and it was an incredibly difficult task given the state of the property. Then, finally, 2 small pieces of paper would give them the lead they had been searching for. 2 receipts for the DIY and hardware store B&Q showed that on Friday, the same day Becky had been reported missing, an electric circular saw, goggles, gloves, and a mask had been purchased. CCTV from the store confirmed that Nathan had been the one to buy the items. Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hall were rearrested, this time on suspicion of the murder of Becky Watts. Following this, the police had to break the devastating news to her family. This was now a murder investigation, and they suspected that Nathan and Shauna were responsible. Becky's father Darren said that it was in that moment his world began to fold in on itself. Before long, flowers were being laid in tribute to Becky as news started to spread. Close to the family home was St. Ambrose Church. A book of remembrance was put out, and the church was open until nighttime for people to light candles for her. Adding to the tragedy, she had been murdered on her brother Dan's 20th birthday. The interviewing officers did not disclose that they had found the receipts. They continued to raise the pressure by saying that the house they had lived in had been forensically searched, leaving the accused guessing as to what exactly had been found. Tuesday, March 3, 2015. At 10:26 p.m., a statement was given to the police from Nathan via his lawyer. Nathan Matthews refused to listen to it and stuck his fingers in his ears to drown out the sound of his statement being read out. It read as follows: I, Nathan Charles Matthews, accept that I am responsible for the death of Rebecca Watts. On February 19, 2015, I attended Crown Hill, St. George, Bristol with my girlfriend, Shauna Hoare. In my car, I had a large bag, stun device, handcuffs, tape, and a mask. I had developed an idea to scare Rebecca by kidnapping her. I wanted to scare her and teach her a lesson. I believed that she was selfish, and her behavior towards my mother was a risk to her health. A few minutes after arriving, Shauna said she wanted a cigarette and went into the garden. I went to the boot of my car, took out a bag that contained the items, then went upstairs to the landing before knocking on Rebecca's door. She replied, "What?" or "Hello," and I said, "Can I see you a minute?" I cannot be sure which order things happened, but I used the items to subdue Rebecca. During the short struggle, my mask slipped, and Rebecca was able to see my face. This caused me to panic, and I strangled her while she was partially in the bag. The horrifying details did not stop there. After murdering Becky, he had used the saw he had purchased from B&Q to dismember her. She had been dismembered in the bathtub, which had then been cleaned, showing that the officers who were being concerned with how out of place the bath had looked had been absolutely right. The occupants of the house where her body was found were arrested for assisting an offender. They were adamant. They had no idea what was inside the bags. They would later plead guilty to the charge. 2 other people would also be acquitted of the same charge. The shed had been searched by Detective Sergeant John Dowding, who had found several suitcases and bags. The body parts had been wrapped in plastic bags and cling film, and cat litter had been used in an attempt to soak up the blood. Salt crystals had also been added to hide the smell. The pathology report showed that Becky had fought for her life with absolutely everything she had. She had sustained more than 40 injuries and had most likely died from suffocation with a hand covering her nose and mouth. She was then stabbed 15 times post-mortem. Becky had to be identified using DNA. The search for Becky Watts had been one of the biggest investigations undertaken by Avon and Somerset police, and for the officers who had worked tirelessly to try and find Becky and bring her home, this was a devastating end. Even though Nathan Matthews had provided the police with an account, they wanted to delve deeper and ascertain if this was the whole truth. They also wanted to know if his girlfriend Shauna Hoare had played a bigger role than had been suggested. When they interviewed Shauna, she was adamant that the first she had learned of Nathan being responsible had been the day before when he had made his prepared statement. The horrifying account of what exactly had happened would finally come out. Thursday, February 19, 2015. Becky arrives home after spending the night at a friend's. At 10:50 a.m., Shauna and Nathan drive to Becky's home. After stopping at a Tesco's to buy some batteries, they know she will be in the house by herself as Angie has a hospital appointment. Nathan normally parks on the road, but on this occasion, he reverses the car into the drive with the boot facing the front door. 11 o'clock and 3 seconds a.m., Becky sends her last text message. It is to her boyfriend saying she is listening to music. She then doesn't respond to his messages. Becky is attacked. She is suffocated, and her body is put into the boot of the car. 12:45 p.m. Angie returns home. Nathan and Shauna act like nothing has happened. 5 p.m. Becky's boyfriend arrives at the house, concerned that his messages are not getting a response from Becky. Shauna answers the door and pretends to look in Becky's room to see if she is there, and her boyfriend speaks to Darren and Angie. Angie agrees that it is unusual that she isn't responding. 7 p.m. After spending the day with the family and with Becky's body still in the boot of the car outside, Shauna and Nathan drive home. After arriving at the house, they take her body inside, and she is dismembered in the bathtub. They then order a pizza and some Chinese food. Nathan Matthews then fakes a phone call from a friend pretending they need his help. He leaves and goes to B&Q. Friday, February 20th. At 12:20 p.m., Nathan Matthews heads to a shop and purchases 2 bottles of drain cleaner. He then goes to B&Q and buys the gloves, masks, goggles, and saw. 3:10, Shauna sends him a message saying, "What time you finish work?" 50 minutes later at 4 p.m., the 999 call is made, and Becky is reported missing. Sean also shares Darren's Facebook post, begging for his daughter to come home. At 6:35 p.m., the police go to Becky's home and speak with Darren, Angie, Nathan and Shauna. Nathan and Shauna say they heard her leave the house the morning before. By 9 p.m., the pair have returned home and they watch a YouTube video called "Do You Want to Hide a Body?" On February 21st, the pair visit an Asda store and purchase bin bags, gloves, rubble sacks, cling film, and bleach. The following day, they go to a 99p store, Anna Wilco's, and purchase a sponge, more rubble sacks, and tape before going to Sainsbury's to buy cling film. On the February 23rd, the police go to their house in a bid to speak to them, but they are met with silence and nobody opens the door. At 4:38 p.m., a phone belonging to the couple is used to search find Becky Watts on Google. And just 2 minutes later, Shauna rings her estranged mother, someone she hadn't spoken to for 4 years, to arrange to go to her house that evening. On February 24th at 2:19 a.m., CCTV captures a white van driving from Cotton Mill Lane to where Becky's body was found. Her body parts are believed to be in the back of the van. The gravity of what it was he had done appeared to be dawning on him. Whilst he was giving this account, Shauna was still being interviewed. After 96 hours of interviews, Nathan Matthews was charged with the murder of his stepsister. They still didn't have enough to charge Shauna with murder, so she was instead charged with perverting the course of justice, and the police continued to build their case against her. Over the following 8 weeks, they continued to look into every aspect of their lives, including phone records, and their computers were also looked at too. It would be in one of Shauna's mobile phones that the key to unlock the case would be found. A series of messages had been deleted, but the officers were able to recover them. Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare had talked about abducting a young woman and hiding her in the attic. Internet searches had also been made for pornographic material involving people around Becky's age. But once again, forensics would show the truth. A bag containing some of the dismembered body parts had Shauna's DNA on it, and so did one of the masks. On June 22nd, Shauna Hoare was charged with the murder of Becky Watts. Becky's funeral was held at St. Ambrose Church on April 17th. The church service was open to the public, but her burial was private. Mourners lined the streets as her coffin was brought past on a horse-drawn carriage. A white dove was also released as her coffin was brought out. On October 6, 2015, the trial of Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare began at Bristol Crown Court. Becky's family sat stunned as they heard for the first time that 2 years prior to her death, Becky had told one of her friends that Nathan had explained to her in graphic detail how he had planned to murder her. She hadn't told this to her family. He had also been in the Territorial Army after being a cadet, and those who had known him during his time in the TA also gave evidence. The courtroom sat horrified as details emerged of how Nathan and Shauna held a shared sexual interest in teenage girls. Prosecutor William Mosley QC said, in addition to their apparent dislike of Rebecca Watts, there is good reason to believe that there was also a sexual motive behind the scheme arising from a shared, unnatural interest in attractive teenage females. Shauna told the court that she was completely innocent and that she was actually scared of her boyfriend. The prosecution fired back, saying that they had acted as a team. Shauna's estranged mother also testified at the trial about Shauna suddenly wanting to talk to her after Becky had been killed. She said, "I was joking and I said, I know why you're at my house all the time. You're running away from the police because you have kidnapped Becky." It was now time for the jury to deliberate, and before long the verdict was in, and it was unanimous. After just 3 hours of deliberations, Shauna Hoare was found guilty of the kidnap and manslaughter of Becky Watts. Nathan Matthews was found guilty of the kidnap and murder of Becky Watts. Shauna Hoare was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Nathan Matthews was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 33 years. When he was led away to begin his sentence, he couldn't look his family in the eye and instead stared at the floor. In June 2016, both Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare lost their appeals against their convictions. Following her death, a serious case review was commissioned by the Bristol Safeguarding Children Board. It concluded that her murder couldn't have been predicted or prevented. The report said there had not been enough attention paid to Becky's wider family, which included her stepbrother and his girlfriend. It said that Becky's sometimes challenging behavior and her anxiety was a result of the bullying she was enduring from Matthews. Darren would go on to write a book about his daughter titled, Becky, the heartbreaking story of Becky Watts. He would later say in an interview, "If they were going to hang him, I would pull the lever so no one else would have to carry that guilt." The stress of what had happened to his daughter had caused him to lose 4 stone or 56 pounds. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat, and he was barely able to keep water down. In spite of all they had been through and the horrifying events that had devastated their family, Darren and Angie's marriage survived, and they remained committed to one another. The way the community had come together to help and support the family had been nothing short of incredible, with many lending a hand where they could and doing their best to help. The story of Becky Watts is both horrifying and heartbreaking. She is perhaps best summed up by the words of her family. She was like a tornado, hurricane, and sunbeam all at once. She came into your life and made you feel alive. On December 20th, 1976, 14-year-old Kenneth Jumper Jr. was walking along the Lehigh River in the borough of Eastside, Pennsylvania in Carbon County around 4:30 p.m. He was familiar with this area as he would go trapping there. He noticed something he had not seen when he had been there just a week earlier: a suitcase. Near it, he saw something horrifying: a human head with dark hair. He ran home to tell his 19-year-old brother Richard what he saw, and the two of them then called the Pennsylvania State Police. A total of 3 suitcases, all spray-painted black, were found at the scene. They had contained the remains of a young woman and the nearly full-term female fetus she had been carrying. Investigators believed that the woman's killer had thrown the suitcases from the bridge that carried Interstate 80 over the river. He or she may have intended for them to go into the river, but they instead hit the ground, causing at least one of them to open up. The young woman had been strangled and shot once in the neck. She had been dismembered with the pieces, some of which were badly mutilated, then placed into the luggage. Her unborn child had been removed from her womb and also placed in one of the suitcases. The young woman's initial autopsy estimated that she had died sometime between December 17th to December 20th, but police would later say that they believed she was killed within 24 hours of her discovery on 20th. Pages from the Northern New Jersey edition of the September 26, 1976 Sunday Daily News were found inside of the suitcases, as was a piece of chenille fabric that could have come from a robe or a blanket. The young woman was believed to be Caucasian and in her late teens or early 20s. She was estimated to have been approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall and 150 pounds. Her killer had cut off her nose and ears, but a sketch of what she may have looked like in life was developed and circulated. Authorities could not match her with a missing persons report or find anyone who recognized the sketch, and without an identity for their victim, their investigation into her murder stalled. The unidentified remains were preserved at the city morgue in Philadelphia for almost 7 years until August of 1983, when they were returned to Carbon County. A local pastor presided over the interment of the unknown woman and her child in the Carbon County Potter's Field, now known as the Lorrytown Road Cemetery near Weatherly, Pennsylvania. Their simple grave marker read simply Beth Doe. Since the young woman's identity was unknown and her family could therefore not be informed of her final resting place, local residents took up the responsibility of visiting the grave and leaving flowers there in their place. In addition to becoming an adopted member of the Carbon County community, the young woman, known only as Beth Doe, also garnered national attention, with individuals from all over the country following the case and suggesting possible identities of the young woman. Police remained dedicated to the case even as years went on without an identification, utilizing new technologies to try to give Beth Doe back her name as they became available. In the decades that followed her death, isotope analysis, more advanced facial reconstructions, and DNA were all used to try to identify her. Her remains were exhumed in 2007 to collect more forensic evidence for testing. Numerous missing women were investigated to see if they could be Beth Doe, but they were all ultimately excluded. More than 4 decades would pass before answers were found in the case, but when they finally came, the identities of both Beth Doe and her killer would be discovered. On March 31, 2021, 63-year-old Louis Sierra, a married father of 2, was arrested at his home in the Ozark Park neighborhood of Queens, New York, and charged with 1 count of criminal homicide. He was arraigned in Queens Criminal Court and held without bail, pending his extradition back to Pennsylvania. Sierra's arrest came as a shock to his neighbors, who could not imagine him committing such a crime. They spoke to the New York Daily News about how kind he was and how they felt as though he were a part of their families. Sierra had been 19 years old when Beth Doe was killed. Pennsylvania State Police announced that they had also been able to finally identify her. She was Evelyn Colon of Jersey City, New Jersey, who had been just 15 years old at the time of her murder. Evelyn was one of 5 children, described by one of her brothers as a sweetheart who was somewhat of a mama's girl. She became pregnant around the time she turned 15 and moved into an apartment with the baby's father, Luis Sierra, who had been her family's neighbor. Sierra was abusive and jealous and sometimes locked Evelyn inside of their apartment. Evelyn told her mother that if anything happened to her, Sierra was involved. Evelyn remained in close contact with her family after she moved out. One day in mid-December of 1976, she told her mother that she was not feeling well. When her mother went to the apartment Evelyn shared with her boyfriend to bring her soup, Evelyn was not there, and she was told by neighbors that the couple had moved out. In January of 1977, Evelyn's family received a letter stating that she had given birth to a 9-pound baby boy she named after his father and was living in Connecticut, which was where the letter had been postmarked. The letter further stated that she would reach out to her family should she need anything. It is widely reported in the media that the Colon family did not report her missing because of this letter. However, PA Homepage, who interviewed one of Evelyn's brothers and one of her nephews, reports that they did try to report her missing, but police would not take a report because of the letter. Due to a house fire, the Colones were left without even pictures of Evelyn to look at in her absence. Evelyn's family desperately wanted to find her. Being without Evelyn, even if it was because she had willingly gone off to start a new life with her boyfriend and new baby, was devastating to her mother. She would walk around Jersey City looking for Evelyn and sit inside of her home looking out her window at people passing on the street to see if any of them could be her daughter. The final words she said before she died were to her son, "Find Evelyn." The family did look for Evelyn, especially once they had access to the internet, using it for research and messaging people they believed they could be related to through Evelyn, whose profiles they found on social media. Evelyn's nephew, Louis Colon Jr., was not born until 7 years after his aunt went missing. He grew up hearing stories about her and hoping that she really had built a happy life with her child somewhere outside of Jersey City. Around 2017, he decided to try to use his DNA to try to connect with his long-lost aunt and cousin. He ordered DNA test kits from several commercial DNA companies, believing his chances of success would be greater if he used multiple services and their respective databases. He hoped that either Evelyn or her child had their DNA tested and put in one of these databases and that the family could be reunited with them. When he received his results, however, he was only matched to very distant cousins in the various databases. In March of 2021, however, he was contacted by law enforcement informing him that they had run the DNA of a murder victim through one of the databases he had uploaded his DNA to and found him as a close familial match. The Colones knew that Evelyn was the only it could be, which authorities confirmed with their cooperation. Luis was disappointed with this outcome as his goal in uploading his DNA was to be reunited with his aunt and cousin. He and the rest of Evelyn's family were horrified to learn that both she and her daughter were dead and that they had been killed in such a brutal fashion. They are trying to find some peace in finally having answers and knowing that Evelyn had not vanished from their lives willingly. Evelyn's family has named her daughter Emily Grace Colon. Evelyn's 2 sisters believe she had planned during her pregnancy to use the name Emily if her baby was a girl, and they felt the name Grace would honor the grace of God. The Colons view the timing of Evelyn's identification as fortuitous in light of her life and their faith. Evelyn's identification was announced just weeks before what would have been her 60th birthday on April 17th and just days before Easter, which was on April 4th. I think that, in light of the whole Easter season, with the Christ's resurrection, her identity, her case, her life, the justice for her murder is being truly resurrected from her grave, right? And it's a powerful season for us as a family, said Evelyn's niece, Miriam Colon Beltman. Evelyn's family now lives throughout the country and are working to travel to Pennsylvania in spite of financial constraints and travel restrictions. They have started a GoFundMe so that they can all visit Evelyn and Emily's grave and further memorialize them. The Colons also want to visit the area so that they can meet the community that has embraced Evelyn and Emily while they were lost to them. Carbon County adopted her. It's incredible. You all kept her memory alive, knowing about her and praying for her. That's so powerful, that this county was praying for my family and how you loved someone you didn't know. We're so thankful for all of you. You're all family now, too, said Evelyn's niece, Miriam. While Louis Sierra has been charged and arrested, authorities are still building their case against him and hope that there are witnesses who can provide more details about the case. The Pennsylvania State Police, along with the Carbon County District Attorney's Office, have set up a tip line in conjunction with Crime Stoppers and ask anyone with information to come forward. Authorities had gone to Sierra's home the week before his arrest, and he had claimed to not know Evelyn at all. When they continued to press the issue, he eventually admitted to dating her and getting her pregnant. He said she had threatened to leave him in the past, so when he came home to their apartment in Jersey City one day and she was gone, he had assumed she went to live with her mother and moved back in with his father shortly thereafter. He eventually admitted to mailing the letter received by Evelyn's family while he and Evelyn were on a day trip in Connecticut to look at apartments, but had no explanation as to why the letter was not mailed until well after Evelyn's death. He is next due in court in New York on May 17th. While they are grateful for the answers they now have and for Sierra's arrest, Evelyn's family is aware that there is still a lot of work to be done to get them the full story of what happened to Evelyn and to get Evelyn justice. Let me tell you something. I can't wait for him to come to Pennsylvania because I want to look at his eyes and ask him why. Evelyn's brother, Louis Cologne Sr., said of Sierra after his arrest. While the family is grateful he is in custody, they know he is not considered guilty until he pleads guilty or is convicted. Until then, I'm not going to rest because, to me, the mission is not done, Evelyn's nephew, Louis Cologne Jr., said. We got her name, that's important, and we got the word out. But now we have to get some justice here. At 12:40 p.m. on March 14, 2015, 911 received a call requesting an urgent welfare check at a house on Landale Street in Studio City, Los Angeles. The call came from Jill Blackstone's friend, who explained that Jill had phoned her, sounding disoriented. Jill had said she had passed out, then woke up feeling as though she was having a stroke and couldn't move. Her speech was unclear, causing her friend to become very concerned about the well-being of both Jill and her sister, Wendy Blackstone. Wendy, who was deaf and legally blind, relied on Jill for care, so if something had happened to Jill, both sisters could be in danger. Jill then abruptly told her friend that Wendy and their 3 dogs were dead. Paramedics and police quickly arrived at the scene and found several typed notes posted around the house, including one on the side of a bin near the garage. One note advised to enter the garage carefully, while another stated, both parties have do not resuscitate orders. A third note simply read, Jill Blackstone, brown hair. Wendy Blackstone, red hair. The final note stated that the dogs were trapped in the garage. These notes were deeply unsettling. Following the instructions on one of the notes, authorities opened the garage door. As soon as they did, 2 dogs ran out. It turned out that the inside had been filled with carbon monoxide, which appeared to have come from the barbecue grill. 49-year-old Wendy Blackstone was unconscious on the ground with her 3rd dog by her, and it was clear that her dog was already dead. Despite the do not resuscitate orders on the notes, paramedics attempted to save Wendy, but nothing could be done. Wendy Blackstone was pronounced dead at the scene. Another one of her dogs that had fled the garage would tragically later die too. What appeared to have been a handwritten suicide note was found in Wendy's hand, and a half-empty bottle of vodka lay nearby too. Wendy's feet were near the barbecue, and there was also a bin which was full of ash and smoking slightly. In the house upstairs, they found Jill lying on the bed half naked, slurring and slow with her words. She was rushed to hospital where she stayed for 2 days to be treated for severe carbon monoxide poisoning. Detectives said it was a very perplexing and strange case and something wasn't making sense. But with Jill in hospital and in no place to talk, all they could do was wait and look into the sisters' history, lives, and talk to the neighbors. Jill and Wendy Blackstone worked from home running their own businesses, which helped to support Wendy even more, as it meant she didn't need to leave the house much and Jill could help care for her. By all accounts, her sister was her primary caregiver. Wendy's life had always revolved around animals, and everybody said she was the happiest when she was with them. When she and her sister Jill moved in together 7 years before, starting an animal rescue business in their home seemed like a no-brainer. It was called Thumping Tails Animal Rescue Center, and they always told people how proud they were of it and how much they loved what they did. Before working with animals, however, Jill Blackstone had actually worked in television production for many years and was fairly well known in these circles. Although her IMDb credits list only 5 projects, multiple sources say she had production roles on some of the biggest reality shows of the 90s and early 2000s: The Jerry Springer Show, The Osbournes, Sally Jassy Raphael, Rosie, Divorce Court, Dr. Drew, and over 100 episodes of Family Court with Judge Penny. She was even nominated for a Cable ACE Award in 1993. As her production work started to slow down around 2009, she and her sister moved in together and started running the business. Jill's LinkedIn profile read, "Some of you know me as a TV producer, others as an animal welfare advocate and dog rescuer. I'm all those things. But sadly, the not-for-profit animal rescue business they loved so much was proving very costly to run." As detectives looked into the sisters' finances, it showed that Jill was bleeding money and drowning in debt. She owed almost $10,000 to animal hospitals and various vets. She owed family members money, had unpaid medical bills, and was $1,000 in on different credit cards. The monthly mortgage repayments alone cost almost $6,000 a few years before. Jill had actually filed for bankruptcy, reportedly being around $1,400,000 in debt and owing her sister Wendy over $100,000 too. The pair had recently sold their $950,000 home, but were still living in it while they waited for the new owners to take possession. According to the neighbors, however, they were having trouble finding somewhere else to live, given all the pets and the extra things that Wendy needed in place to support her. People said Jill had become more and more withdrawn as the stress of the move and finances were getting to her. The relationship between the sisters and their parents was strained as well, and Jill told people she had spoken to them about adapting their home so they could also help care for Wendy, but due to their age, they said it just wasn't going to work. And now, 7 years after they bought their house in Studio City and moved in together, Wendy and her dogs were now dead, and Jill was very ill in hospital and lucky to be alive. Although you can never know what is going on in someone else's world or mind, neighbors said that the thought of Wendy taking her own life was completely shocking. Wendy always seemed happy and chatty, and her dogs and the business really were her whole world. The thought of not only leaving her beloved pets behind, but poisoning them to death was quite unbelievable. Wendy's autopsy showed no outward signs of trauma, and the toxicology report revealed there was no alcohol in her system despite the bottle of vodka next to her. A Los Angeles County coroner recorded her death as being from the combined effects of smoke inhalation and an overdose of alprazolam, but her manner of death was left undetermined. The more the authorities looked into it, the stranger it all became. As soon as Jill was well enough to talk, she gave police her statement. At first, she denied saying that she had told anyone that Wendy and the dogs were dead, and claimed she had no idea how they came to be there. She said all she remembered was being in the garage and starting up the barbecue to keep the space warm before lighting some of the barbecue briquettes in the metal can so she and Wendy could toast marshmallows. But both the barbecue and the metal can were enclosed in the garage, not outside in the garden as would be expected for obvious reasons, and this was another red flag. After this, she said she went outside where she passed out on the ground and woke up with the sun burning her face. She then called her friend and said she thought she was having a stroke, just as her friend had told the police. But to the detectives, there were so many inconsistencies and holes in the story, they started asking more questions. Experts that had been examining the note found in Wendy's hand now felt strongly that it had been written by Jill and not Wendy. It was not signed by Wendy, nor were any of the other notes outside the house either. Given everything the police had uncovered in the 2 days Jill was in hospital, they believed that Jill had drugged her younger sister before dragging her into the garage where the dogs followed or were led as well. She then lit the grill, which started burning and leaking carbon monoxide, and staged the scene to look like Wendy had taken her own life by placing the note in her hand and notes around the property. Jill vehemently denied this and said just like her sister, she had devoted her life to saving animals and people and also helping Wendy. She said she would never want to bring her harm. "I know what it looks like. This was not me. It's just not," she said. "I'm so alone. People of 52, they have kids, they have spouses, they have adults who can help. It was all on me. I'm freaking tired because I have lupus," Jill added. The one note that read Jill Blackstone brown hair and Wendy Blackstone red hair, and the other that said, "Both parties have do not resuscitate," orders did imply that authorities would need this to identify both women, which further inferred that Jill had intended to no longer be alive when the police entered the home. Then, to their surprise, Jill claimed she was carrying out her younger sister's wishes and that the pair had made a pact to die together. She said she was meant to die as well, but called a friend for help at the last second. But authorities weren't convinced and thought that even this was an attempt at staging and setting the scene to try and get away with murder. They placed Jill Blackstone under arrest for the murder of her sister Wendy and sent their findings to the district attorney's office. But after they reviewed everything, the DA's office ordered she was released after 4 days. The DA's office declined to file charges, saying there wasn't enough evidence and they needed the police to give them more. Neighbors said that Jill returned home in tears, and after this, she was barely seen out. Sources said she moved to New Jersey to live closer with relatives sometime later. As word started to spread, people started wondering if Jill's financial issues were a factor in what had happened. That was not the answer to her problems, one neighbor said. She was trying to find a foundation that would help them and help financially take care of her sister, but I don't think she got very far. No one had to die over money. There had to be other options. Another said they were having a hard time finding a new home because the sister that died was very ill. She couldn't see. She couldn't hear. She was housebound, so she needed to find a house that could accommodate her sister with the illness and the dogs. Evidently, the pressure was intense on them, but nobody expected this to happen. She loved her dogs desperately. They were her world. So why would she do that? It breaks my heart. It really does. Sickens me, someone else commented. Things then went very quiet. Wendy's death was still undetermined and Jill was no longer in the state. But behind the scenes, an arduous investigation was underway. Homicide detectives and arson investigators from the Los Angeles Fire Department were conducting separate investigations and assessments that would last 2 years and take us to the spring of 2018. In March that year, the LAPD made an announcement. Jill was located at a hospital in Baltimore where she was placed under arrest and charged with the murder of her sister and 3 counts of animal cruelty. Her bail was set at over $2 million and she was extradited back to California. Prosecutors said that the reason things took so long was because the biological and toxic evidence had been destroyed long before they had filed a case, meaning they essentially had to start from scratch again. If found guilty at trial, she was facing a life sentence, and after several delayed hearings, things finally started moving ahead. Police and prosecutors believed the motive for murder was Jill's frustration of being forced to provide Wendy long-term care, as well as the associated financial hardship. Some detectives felt that Jill might have planned what was going to be a murder-suicide, but whereas Jill was found and saved, Wendy couldn't be. However, in court, prosecutors disagreed with this theory and said there is reasonable inference that Wendy Blackstone did not consent to and was not aware of the defendant's plan. Jill's lawyer was already in the process of trying to get the murder charge reduced to manslaughter, which would carry a far lesser sentence. He also argued that the original interview the police had conducted in the hospital should be thrown out on the grounds that she was not in a clear state of mind and couldn't properly consent to it. Her lawyer called the case a family tragedy and said that Jill and Wendy's parents didn't want to see their daughter die in prison, having already lost their other daughter. He called the evidence they had against her fake, and the whole situation was nothing more than a very tragic accident. He claimed that Wendy was the one that had been barbecuing food for the pair of them and she had died of accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. He added that the claims of there being any kind of fire inside the garage was not true, but this completely contradicted the coroner's findings. It was then announced that Jill would be taking a plea. In court, she arrived in a wheelchair with her lawyer saying her health had taken a turn and she was now suffering from Parkinson's disease as well as lupus. February 2022. Jill Blackstone pleaded guilty to 1 felony count of voluntary manslaughter along with 3 felony counts of animal cruelty. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Just as the police had said from the beginning, It was a very perplexing and complicated case, with numerous theories and ideas about what had happened, how it came to be, and the ins and outs of any conversations that had happened prior. And the reality is, it really is impossible to know. Whether there was a pact of sorts or not, whether it was all over money or not, these questions will probably never be answered. All we know is that 49-year-old Wendy and the dogs that she loved so much passed away in truly horrendous circumstances, and they are all missed dearly by the Blackstones' friends, family, and neighbors. In 1983, 21-year-old Linda Reid had a lot to look forward to. She and her husband, Robert, had been married for 2 years, and they were in the process of building a house. To save money for their home, the couple was living in a caravan on property owned by Robert's parents. They also planned to start a family. Linda worked as a sales associate in the jewelry department at McDonnell and East, a department store in the Pacific Fair Shopping Center in Broadbeach, Queensland. On December 13, 1983, during the busy Christmas season, Linda went on her lunch break at noon. Known for her strong work ethic and responsibility, Linda's co-workers grew concerned when she didn't return. Robert became worried when she hadn't come home by the end of her shift and, even more so, when he learned she hadn't returned to work after her lunch break. He began searching frantically for her at the shopping center and at other places she frequented before calling the police at 7 p.m. Linda's mother, Nancy, also attempted to report Linda as missing, but the police would not take the report since she had not been missing for 24 hours. Police would later learn that Linda had gone to the Commonwealth Bank at 12:18 p.m., where she obtained a bank check so that she could pay some of her bills. A security guard reported seeing Linda drive out of the car park in her white Mazda a short time later. Where she was going and why she would leave the shopping center when she was due back at work at 1 o'clock was a mystery to her family and co-workers. Linda and her car would not be found until 3 days after her disappearance. Her Mazda, with Christmas presents she had already purchased still inside of it, was located along Miller Road Drive in Bushland, approximately a 30-minute drive north of where Linda was seen. In 1983, the area was remote, but today it has been developed extensively, and the location is not far from where the parking lot of Helensvale Town Center currently is located. The site was also less than 2 miles away from where Linda and Robert's home was being built. Linda's partially clothed body was found not far from her car, her head in a muddy creek bed. Her hands had been tied behind her back with a bikini top and a blue cord. Her face had been forced into the muddy creek bed with such force that mud and debris would be found inside of her lungs at her post-mortem examination. She had died of either drowning, smothering, strangulation, or suffocation, but the decomposition her body had undergone before it was found prevented any further degree of specification. Given how busy the shopping center Linda had vanished from had been on the day of her disappearance, authorities hoped to find witnesses among the hundreds of Christmas shoppers who had been shopping that day. They displayed Linda's car at the Pacific Fair Shopping Center as part of a display that also consisted of a mannequin, photographs, and other information in hopes of getting witnesses to come forward with tips. Several witnesses from the shopping center came forward, reporting seeing a baby-faced teenager with blonde hair in the car park where Linda's car had been parked. Other eyewitnesses who had not been at the shopping center on December 13th also came forward. They reported seeing a man hitchhiking along the Gold Coast Highway less than a kilometer away from where Linda's body had been on the day she disappeared. One man came forward reporting he had given a ride to a hitchhiker in his van a few days after Linda's murder after picking him up not far from where her body was found. His description of the hitchhiker matched that provided by other eyewitnesses. The hitchhiker had been carrying menthol cigarettes loose in his hand, and he did not have the package they came in. This detail caught the attention of investigators because an empty pack of Winfield menthol cigarettes had been found on the floor below the front passenger seat of Linda's car. Neither Linda nor her husband smoked. The witness's van was processed by police and an unidentified fingerprint was found on its passenger side window. Unfortunately, there was no match to it on file at the time. A major break in the case came in 1985 when a jailhouse informant claimed that a fellow prisoner had confessed to Linda's murder. 45-year-old Graham Steer told authorities that Craig McConnell had confessed that he and another man had abducted and killed Linda while he and Steer were both being held at the Bago Road Jail. According to Steer, McConnell had told him that he and another man had been trying to steal a car from the car park at Pacific Fair and abducted and killed Linda after they feared she saw them. McConnell was serving 2 life sentences for 2 gruesome murders committed in Brisbane in 1984, both of which he committed with several accomplices. A detective described McConnell in court as the greatest argument for the death penalty there ever was. McConnell had confessed to both of the murders and pleaded guilty to them in court. McConnell claims that police tried to link him to Linda's murder and questioned him about it when he initially confessed to the 2 murders he did commit. He denied killing her at that time and continued to do so after Steer reported his alleged jailhouse confession. McConnell was brought to trial for Linda's murder in 1986, the admitted killer still denying any involvement in the case. A main witness against him died of a heroin overdose just prior to the start of the trial, and the case against McConnell was based on Steer's statement and circumstantial evidence. According to Steer, McConnell had drawn him a map of the scene where Linda's body had been found, which authorities determined was accurate in its placement of a line of pine trees near the creek bed. Steer testified in court that McConnell had told him that Linda had warned him, "Rob will get you for this," as she was being driven to her death. Linda did call her husband Robert Rob as opposed to Bob or Robbie or any other nickname. Steer also claimed that McConnell had told him that he had eaten the sandwich Linda had packed for lunch and that it had cheese and pickles on it. Traces of cheese had been found inside of Linda's car when it was processed by the police. This circumstantial evidence was not enough to convince a jury of McConnell's guilt, and he was found not guilty of Linda's murder due to a lack of evidence in October of 1986. "I never believed in going down for something I never done," McConnell said in court after the verdict was read and before he was returned to prison to continue serving his 2 life sentences. Despite his acquittal, police presented evidence casting McConnell as a likely suspect in Linda's murder at an inquest into her case in 1987. Linda's death devastated her family, including her parents, Nancy and Oscar, and her brother Philip, and the passage of time did little to ease their pain. In a 2010 interview, Oscar revealed that he had been diagnosed with kidney cancer and feared he would die without knowing who was responsible for his daughter's murder. "I just want to know what happened to my beautiful daughter. I deserve that. It's always been terrifying to think we could never find out who killed Linda. I just want answers," he said. "It hurts to know Linda's killer is still out there, walking around, living life. Linda had her future taken away and so did we." Unfortunately, Oscar did pass away before his daughter's case was solved. Linda's husband Robert could only sleep a few hours a night immediately after she was killed, staying awake for most of the night thinking about what had happened to his wife. Years after her death, he was still often crying himself to sleep. As a sign of his love for Linda and devotion to the life they had planned to build together, he made a vow to never have children with anyone else, giving up his dream of becoming a father. "I am destined to remain a bachelor. The vows I made were for Linda. The children we planned were Linda's and mine," he said at the 1987 inquest into Linda's murder. Linda's case was reopened in 2009 after police received an anonymous tip. A major break came in 2014 when the fingerprints from the witness van, believed to belong to the man who hitchhiked away from the area of the crime scene, were re-examined. Now, there was a match to them in the criminal database. This discovery did not result in an immediate arrest. Police instead launched an extensive renewed investigation to find further information and ensure that this suspect truly was Linda's killer. They examined over 150 pieces of evidence using the more advanced scientific techniques now available to them, digitized nearly 700 from the investigation, and re-interviewed more than 100 witnesses. The next major development in the case came when authorities found that a vaginal swab taken during Linda's autopsy was still in evidence. The sample was small and degraded, so it was sent to a specialized lab in New Zealand in 2017 in hopes that DNA could still be extracted from it. The lab was able to extract DNA from the sample, but found it to be from multiple people. The mixed sample therefore required further specialized testing. Ultimately, the lab determined that the sample from the swab was 70 million times more likely to be a mixture of DNA from Linda Reid, her husband Robert, and the suspect identified through his fingerprints than it was to be from Linda and Robert and any other individual. On August 22, 2018, nearly 35 years after Linda was killed, 51-year-old Troy James Omera was arrested and taken to court to be charged with her murder. Omera had been just 17 years old at the time of Linda's murder, and his physical appearance was close to that of the teenager witnesses had reported seeing in the Pacific Fair Shopping Center car park the day Linda disappeared. He had been living a transient lifestyle at the time. When he was arrested for Linda's murder, Omera was already serving a life sentence for a murder he committed just 18 months after Linda was killed. In July of 1985, 22-year-old Vanessa Joy O'Brien had been at a shopping center picking up her wedding bands for her upcoming marriage when Omera accosted her in the car park in broad daylight and forced her into her car at knife point. He made her drive to a remote area where he bound, raped, and killed her. Her body was later found in a garbage tip at Kipperong, north of Brisbane. While he was incarcerated, Omera had assaulted several guards and made attempts to escape, one of which was successful and resulted in him being out of custody for a full day. Omera initially denied killing Linda, but in March of 2021, he pled guilty to both her rape and murder in Brisbane's Supreme Court. He found Linda eating her lunch in her car on December 13, 1983, and forced her to drive out to the bushland where he bound, raped, and killed her. He claimed he had killed Linda because he felt like killing a woman at random that day, the same motive presented at his trial for Vanessa O'Brien's murder. Police believe Omera acted alone and that he did not know Linda prior to the day he killed her. Following Omera's plea, victim impact statements from Linda's husband and mother were read to the court. What can I say after 37 years? 1,000 tears and many prayers, wondering what my daughter went through in the last minutes of her life. Linda was a wonderful daughter, sister, and for a short time also a wonderful wife. My only regret is that Linda's father never lived to see this day. Linda's mother Nancy's statement read in part. Omera's defense lawyer told the court that his client hoped to one day be released from custody so that he could at least see, and hopefully care for, his elderly mother, who was now in a nursing home, and his cancer-stricken stepfather. He also told the court that Omera's violent behavior in prison had taken place in the 1990s and that he had been enrolled in educational programs since then. Crown Prosecutor Jody Wooldridge warned the court that Omera's guilty plea should not be taken as a sign of remorse. When he delivered his decision about Omera's sentencing the week after Omera entered his guilty plea, Justice Glenn Martin agreed with this assessment. On March 17, 2021, Justice Martin sentenced Omera to 20 years in prison for Linda's murder and a further 10 years for her rape. Justice Martin also ordered that Omera would be eligible for parole on July 11, 2022, just 16 months after she was sentenced in Linda's case. Justice Martin argued that while Omera's crimes against Linda showed a high level of violence, sentencing could not be based on a strict mathematical calculation and that another life sentence for Omera would be, in his words, excessive. In making his decision, Justice Martin took into account the fact that Omera had legally been a minor when he killed and current sentencing guidelines. If the defendant had committed the two offenses of murder in the recent times as an adult, then he would be required to serve a minimum of 30 years in prison, he said in his decision. While he believed the nature of the crime merited a substantial sentence, he argued that because Omera will have been incarcerated for 37 years in July of 2022, it should be up to the parole board to determine if he is released. While Justice Martin's decision may be correct from a legal perspective, the possibility that Omera may be released so shortly after being sentenced for Linda's rape and murder does raise ethical concerns. The 37 years that have passed since Linda was taken from her family have not taken away the pain her loss caused them, but they have also not made Linda any less important to, or loved by, those who were closest to her. Linda's mother, Nancy, continues to visit her grave every week. Among the millions of users was Ashlin Black, a 25-year-old who loved fashion, the outdoors, vintage shopping, camping, and listening to Nirvana. She lived in Layton, Utah, and worked as a carer, looking after young children facing developmental or educational challenges. Her family described her as someone who loved being a voice for those who struggled to speak for themselves, and her job seemed to come naturally. Ashlin longed to become a mother, a dream she cherished deeply. Her plan had always been to adopt, a decision influenced by her work as a carer, according to those close to her. She was known for her kindness, patience, and welcoming nature, with a big, infectious laugh that made everyone feel instantly at ease. On May 23, 2020, Ashlin, like many others, was scrolling through Tinder. She soon matched with 24-year-old Ethan Hunsaker, a father of one who had recently separated from his wife and was now renting a house on his own. The two began chatting and hit it off, quickly making plans to meet for dinner and drinks that evening. At around 9 p.m., Ethan drove over to Ashlin's home to pick her up. The pair headed out to a local bar where they stayed for about 4 hours before heading back to Ethan's house. Several hours later, 3:19 a.m., the person that had made the call was Ashlin's date, Ethan. But on the phone, he said he didn't even know Ashlin, didn't know her last name, and that he would like the officers to kill him when they arrived at the house. Police rushed to the property on North Reid Avenue. Ashlin was face down in one of the bedrooms with stab wounds across her whole body. Paramedics did everything they could to try and save her, but it was no good. Ashlin Black was pronounced dead at the scene. Ethan had marks and scratches all over his body, and it was clear from the second police walked in that he was responsible. Ethan said that the pair had come back after their evening out and slept together before falling asleep. He said he woke up and saw Ashlin sleeping on his arm. Out of nowhere, he started choking her as hard as he could for about a minute as Ashlin tried to fight him off. As she lay half-conscious on the floor, Ethan grabbed a knife from the kitchen, knelt over her, and started stabbing her. He said he watched her bleed out for about 10 minutes before calling 911. Despite his confession, officers couldn't make sense of how this had all come to be. According to Ethan, the date went well and they were really getting on. There had been no fight or argument that had got out of control. One minute they were sleeping, the next Ashlin was dead. But Ethan soon bluntly said that he had invited Ashlin over with the sole intention of killing her. He said he knew when he picked her up that night that if she came back to his house, he would take her life. He was calm and vacant as they arrested him and was taken into custody where he was held without bail. To everybody's surprise, he soon pleaded not guilty to Ashlin's murder. As word started to spread about what had happened, for those that knew Ethan, while some were shocked, others not so much. Ethan Hunsaker had worked for a concrete company for a short while, and his manager said that his outgoing personality meant he was soon working one-on-one with clients. But other co-workers said that something seemed to be off. His behavior had changed drastically since he split from his ex-wife and he became withdrawn, soon arriving to work late before not even turning up at all. After a couple of months, Ethan was fired after having an altercation with a female co-worker, the details of which remain unconfirmed. People said he made a lot of dark and sinister comments and spoke about wanting to hurt and kidnap women. He also spoke of having suicidal feelings and homicidal thoughts as well. Ethan's boss said he was kind of the goofy young kid that always made us laugh, I guess that always had something stupid to say. Then end of last year, it was just weird. He went from goofy to just nobody wanted to be around him. He added that what he had been arrested for didn't actually surprise him. A woman named Autumn came forward with her own story to tell as well. She said she had been bombarded with texts and messages via social media from Ethan right up until just a week before Ashlin was killed. The pair had met through an old job and had known each other for about 11 years. Autumn said everything started off very friendly and the pair would hang out on their lunch breaks. She stated she had no romantic interest in him and had never given him any reason to believe they were more than just friends. But in 2019, Ethan had started asking her out. Autumn would make excuse after excuse and soon started completely ignoring him, but he would find other ways to message her on different platforms. Liz Solis, the spokesperson for the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition, highlighted the fact that a lot of people on social media were placing the blame on Ashlin, as opposed to Ethan. She said, "This is in no way the victim's fault, and it's important to remind people of that. It doesn't matter how the victim met the perpetrator or where or when. The decision to commit the violent act was that of the perpetrator." Just over 1 year later, June 2021. To the relief of Ashlin's family and despite the prosecution refusing to offer a plea deal, Ethan Hunsaker changed his not guilty plea. He finally pleaded guilty to murder and also pleaded to being mentally unwell. His lawyers requested that his mental health be taken into consideration upon his sentencing. Several doctors conducted evaluations and Ethan was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, recurrent psychotic features, generalized anxiety disorder, and severe alcohol use disorder. The judge said his mental health at the time of Ashlin's murder was not a factor, but agreed he would factor in his current status, and this left him with a few options when sentencing him. One was to send him straight to prison. Another was to commit him to the state hospital for 18 months before being transferred to prison, or to send him to the Utah State Hospital with no time limit for treatment. In February 2022, a judge sentenced Ethan Hunsaker to 15 years to life for murder. But before he began his time in prison, he would receive 18 months of treatment in the Utah State Hospital. The judge said that he hoped Ethan would get the help he needed, but added this was not the primary reason he was agreeing to the treatment. He said he was actually concerned for other inmates and officers in prison, worrying that Ethan might hurt more people and this move might offer people more protection. Ashlin's mother said they felt that the court had not been courteous to their family's needs and feelings, whilst making sure they provided accommodations to the person that had cruelly taken Ashlin away from them, something the judge apologized for, stating that the court's hands were tied in many ways. Ashlin's family said it was as senseless a crime as it was evil. Our hearts are broken and our lives are forever changed due to the despicable acts of another person. The life of an amazing, fun-loving young woman was taken, one who had a passion for being the voice of those who could not speak out for themselves. The lives of her friends and family are permanently altered. In court, Ashlin's sister said, "We haven't talked about Ashlin. We haven't talked about who she was or her impact on the world. She was a good person. She tried her best to do good things in this world. And it is so clear that Ashlin Black was already making such an impact on so many people and so many young lives. It is important that we remember her for the compassionate, selfless, kind-hearted 25-year-old she was." Her father said that his daughter always had a special talent for being late to everything, but he said he would give up anything to be sat waiting for her, if it meant she would walk back through the door to see him. Samantha Josephson grew up in Robbinsville, New Jersey. After graduating from high school in 2015, she went on to attend the University of South Carolina. Friendly, kind, and full of energy, Samantha was well-liked by everyone she met throughout her busy life. Her vibrant personality helped her balance her studies with various other commitments. She was a member of the Alpha Gamma Delta sorority and had also studied abroad in Barcelona. In addition to her academic responsibilities, Samantha worked part-time at the Liberty Tap Room and made sure to prioritize her relationships with friends and family who were incredibly important to her. By early 2019, 21-year-old Samantha was preparing to graduate with a degree in political science. She planned to return to the Northeast to be closer to her family after graduation in May. Samantha had been accepted into law school at both Rutgers University in New Jersey and Drexel University in Philadelphia, choosing to attend Drexel, where she had received a full scholarship. Her ambition was to specialize in international law. Samantha spent the evening of March 28, 2019 out with her friends in Columbia's Five Points district. She became separated from her group of friends, who last saw her shortly after 1 a.m. on March 29th at a bar near the 700 block of Hardin Street. Samantha ordered an Uber to drive her home. She never arrived there. Samantha was scheduled to work later in the morning of 29th, and her boss was surprised when she did not arrive on time. He instead was met with a phone call from one of Samantha's friends who was asking if she had arrived at the restaurant. Samantha's friends and roommates spent the morning going to establishments near where she was last seen, showing her picture and asking to see surveillance footage. When they could not locate her despite hours of searching, they reported her missing to the police at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon. Around 3:30 p.m., just as the missing persons investigation was getting underway, turkey hunters in rural Clarendon County discovered a woman's body along a remote dirt road approximately 65 miles away from where Samantha had last been seen. They called the sheriff's department to report what they had found. Based on the description of the body and the clothes found with it, authorities believed it was Samantha Josephson, a suspicion which was later confirmed. The pathologist who examined Samantha's body would later testify that she had sustained approximately 120 stab wounds and that at some point, he had stopped counting them as there were so many wounds that the exact higher number would not add anything to the report. The injuries were throughout her head, arms, chest, leg, foot, and back. Several of the wounds that had penetrated her brain and neck would have been fatal on their own. Several of her injuries indicated that she had fought back against her killer. The pathologist also testified that it was difficult to obtain a blood sample from the body for routine testing, as just over a tablespoon of blood was left in it. More than 500 people attended a vigil held in Samantha's memory on March 31st. More than a dozen people who were important to her, including her father and boyfriend, spoke at the vigil. Samantha's body was returned to her family in New Jersey, and her funeral, attended by nearly 1,000 mourners, was held at Congregation Bethlehem in Princeton Junction on April 3rd. Her body was later interred at Perrineville Jewish Cemetery. Samantha was posthumously awarded her degree in political science by the University of South Carolina in May. The investigation into Samantha's murder was greatly helped by digital records and surveillance footage. A check of Samantha's bank records showed that several unsuccessful attempts to use Samantha's debit card to make withdrawals were made at 2 ATMs in Columbia and Sumter, South Carolina, both along Sumter Highway in the hours after her murder. Surveillance videos showed someone making these attempts, which were unsuccessful because they did not have the correct PIN. However, this person covered their face, so it could not be seen in any of the footage. Surveillance footage from the area where Samantha was last seen was more helpful in developing a theory as to what had happened to her once she was separated from her friends, and provided a major lead. The footage showed Samantha standing outside and ordering an Uber. Eventually, a black Chevrolet Impala pulled up in a parking spot next to her. Samantha got into the back seat of the Impala just after 2 a.m. Authorities believe Samantha thought the car was the Uber she had ordered to drive her home. It was not. Footage also showed the Impala circling the block where Samantha had been waiting on the curb prior to it pulling up next to her. This means the driver may have seen her as she was waiting. Samantha had initially approached a different vehicle to see if it was her Uber while the Impala had been behind it. After seeing Samantha realize her mistake and go back onto the curb, the Impala's driver pulled into the parking spot next to her and Samantha got into the car. Police therefore began looking for the black Impala. Around 3 a.m. on March 30th, just 25 hours after Samantha was seen getting into the Impala, a Columbia police officer observed a vehicle consistent with the one Samantha had been seen getting into driving just a few blocks away from the 5 Points district. He pulled the car over and the driver was initially cooperative. However, when the officer mentioned that his vehicle matched the description of a suspect vehicle, the driver fled on foot. After a short foot chase, the driver was apprehended. He was 24-year-old Nathaniel David Rowland. Inside Rowland's vehicle, police found a container of bleach, germicidal wipes, and window cleaner. They also found a large amount of blood and Samantha Josephson's cell phone. The child safety locks on the car were activated, meaning the back doors could only be opened from the outside. This led authorities to theorize that the child locks had been used to prevent Samantha from escaping the car when she realized she was not in her Uber. After the blood was found to belong to Samantha, Rowland was formally charged with her kidnapping and murder. Forensic evidence continued to mount against Rowland as the investigation progressed. Samantha's footprint was found on the rear passenger window of his vehicle. Samantha's DNA was found under Rowland's fingernails. Her DNA was also found in numerous locations throughout his Impala, on the heel of his sock and on a bandana confirmed to be his because his own DNA was also present on it. Samantha's blood was on cleaning supplies later found in Rowland's girlfriend's home and on two sections, the serrated blade and the inner handle on a depot-bladed multi-tool found in the trash behind the home. One of Samantha's hairs was also found on the multi-tool. Investigators believed this multi-tool was the murder weapon because it would cause wounds consistent with the parallel wounds found on Samantha's body. Maria Howard, Rowland's girlfriend at the time Samantha was killed and the resident of the home where much of the evidence against Rowland was found, would later testify she had seen Rowland cleaning that multi-tool later in the day of Samantha's murder. Also found in the trash, along with the multi-tool, were bed sheets, towels, cleaning wipes, toilet paper, a jacket, and a pair of pants, all with Samantha's blood on them. When Rowland went to trial for Samantha's murder in July of 2021, his now ex-girlfriend, Maria, testified against him. During her extensive time on the stand, she provided important information about Rowland's actions and locations both before and after the time Samantha had been killed. On March 28, 2019, the evening when Samantha had begun her time in the Five Points district with her friends, Roland had come over to Maria's home and was going to spend the night there. They went to bed, but Maria woke up in the middle of the night to find that Roland was gone. Roland enjoyed going out to the Five Points district and had previously gone out to do so after Maria had fallen asleep, so she was not necessarily alarmed to find that he was gone when she awoke. However, Maria was upset. He left that night because he was supposed to give her a ride to her job at McDonald's in the morning for her 7 a.m. shift, and she hated being late for work. Furthermore, she had given Roland her shirt from her uniform to wash and dry, and she had left her hat from her uniform under the rear window of his car the day before, so she could not simply call someone else for a ride to get her to work if he did not return in time. Maria could not recall the exact time Roland returned to her home on the morning of March 29, 2019, only that it was after she was supposed to already be at work. Upset that he had made her late, she went out to talk to him and ask for her work shirt. He did not have it, so he left her home and returned with it 10 minutes later. When he gave her the shirt, it was wet, and when she looked for her hat in his car, it was gone. She asked Roland where it was, and he told her it was in the country. She was confused as to why it was out in the country, and when she asked him why it was there, he told her it was because it had blood on it. She asked him why it had blood on it, and he told her to mind her own business. Maria got into the car so Roland could drive her to work, but he had to stop for gas and to buy some items on the way. It was then that Maria noticed there was blood in the back seat. A sheet had been put down over it, but it had not been placed perfectly, so some of the blood was still visible. Maria asked Roland about the blood, and he again told her to mind her own business. Roland dropped Maria off at McDonald's at 7:45, 45 minutes after her shift was supposed to start. Roland was also supposed to come back to pick up Maria at the end of her shift, which she failed to do, so Maria found another ride home. When she arrived back at her house, she was angry, banging on the door, but Roland's reaction was just one of shock at seeing her. Maria went inside to take a shower, and when she was finished, she saw Roland outside, cleaning his car. When she went outside, she could smell bleach. Roland obviously did not thoroughly clean the vehicle, as blood would still be visible inside of it. When he was apprehended by police, and texts sent between Maria and Roland that day show them discussing blood that had gotten on Maria's daughter's shoe after she rode in the vehicle later in the day. Maria and Roland drove to her mother's house that day, with Maria driving Roland's car. During the drive, Roland put on blue surgical gloves and began cleaning his multi-tool with wipes. That evening, 2 of Roland's friends came to Maria's home to meet up with him, and they left to go out to the Five Points district for the evening. Maria asked Roland what he was doing going out to such a popular area when he had blood in his car. He told her to mind her own business. After Roland left, Maria was watching the news when a segment about Samantha Josephson was aired, and the surveillance footage of her getting into a black Impala was shown. Maria recognized the car as Roland's, and the events of the day suddenly made sense to her. She did not immediately act on this realization, however. Maria testified that she did not call the police immediately after seeing the blood in Roland's car or seeing the news segment, because she feared for her own life and that of her young daughter should she act out against Roland. He was taken into custody just a few hours after the news segment aired. Roland and Samantha's cell phones were also important pieces of evidence at his trial. GPS data shows Samantha and Roland's cell phones traveling in the same direction until Samantha's phone was turned off and Roland's phone continuing on to the area where Samantha's body was eventually found. Roland was familiar with this area, as it was not far from a home owned by his family where he had recently resided. Samantha's cell phone was not turned on again until later in the morning on March 29th, when it was in downtown Columbia and then traveled to Monticello Road. Surveillance footage shows a man dressed in dark clothes coming into a cell phone store on that road. According to the store's owner, the man, whom he identified as Roland, drove up in a black Impala and wanted to sell a phone. The phone was unlocked, and the owner saw a picture on it of a young woman he would later say appeared to be Samantha Josephson. The man wanted $300 for the phone, but the store only offered him $125, so the man left the store with the phone, which would later be located by police in Roland's vehicle. A list had been found in Roland's car reading duct tape, taper whole body, gloves, all black, flip phone, gasoline, matches. with the word matches crossed out. A handwriting expert compared the handwriting on the list to a known handwriting major aspect. A major aspect of their defense was the fact that while Samantha's DNA had been found in locations and on items tied to Roland and on his body, Roland's DNA had not been found on Samantha's body even though she tried to fight off her killer. Roland had been wearing long sleeves the night of the murder and scratches were found on his jacket. Just prior to resting their case, the defense requested that all of the charges against Roland be thrown out, arguing that the prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial and mainly tied Samantha to Roland's vehicle rather than the man himself. Circuit Judge Clifton Newman rejected the request, stating that the prosecution did present more direct evidence, and that the jury should have the opportunity to consider the extensive amount of evidence, both direct and circumstantial, that had been presented. On July 27, 2021, after just an hour of deliberation, a jury found Roland guilty of kidnapping, murder, and possessing a weapon during a violent crime in Samantha's case. After the verdict was read and before the sentencing, Samantha's loved ones were able to address the court about the pain her loss had caused them. Roland's mother also addressed the court, who was interrupted by the judge as she took the opportunity to claim her son was innocent. Judge Newman reminded her that the jury had already found her son guilty and she was not speaking as a witness. If she had any evidence that would have supported her son's innocence, she should have testified to it during a trial. As he stood before Judge Newman for his sentencing, Roland again claimed to be innocent of the crimes he had just been found guilty of. Judge Newman was not as moved by Roland's word as he was by what he described as the avalanche of evidence against him. Roland is currently serving his life sentence at Kirkland Correctional Institution. While the Josephson family was grateful Roland would not have the opportunity to hurt anyone else, his conviction did not remove the pain they had felt since Samantha was murdered. "I will always love you, think about you, worry about you, and I will always hear your voice inside my head saying, 'Dad,'" Seymour Josephson said at his daughter's funeral. "You had so much more to do. You will not be forgotten. You could never be. We will never forget your name. Samantha Josephson. Samantha Josephson." Samantha's name would continue to live on through the advocacy of her family, as well as through legislation passed in response to her murder. Samantha's parents, Marcy and Seymour Josephson, established the What's My Name Foundation to honor their daughter's memory by providing education about ride-sharing safety. The name of the foundation comes from one of the major safety tips it advocates: passengers asking the driver of a vehicle to tell them the passenger's name before getting into their vehicle to ensure they are in fact the ride they ordered. The Josephsons hope this simple action will become as instinctual as putting on a seat belt amongst rideshare passengers. The Josephstones have also called for more accountability in the ride-sharing industry and advocated for the widespread use of already available technology to make ride-sharing more safe by having drivers place barcodes on their windows for passengers to scan to confirm they have found their correct ride before getting into a vehicle. Shortly after Samantha's murder, Uber announced a new initiative to use push notifications to remind users to check the make, model, and license plate of a vehicle, as well as the name and photograph of the driver before getting into a vehicle. The initiative was initially rolled out in Columbia, South Carolina, as part of a larger campus safety initiative in partnership with the University of South Carolina. Lyft also announced plans to conduct checks on their drivers daily, in addition to their already mandated annual background check. Several pieces of legislation named in honor of Samantha, designed to increase rideshare safety, have passed since her death. South Carolina's Samantha L. Josephson Ride-Sharing Safety Act was written shortly after Samantha was killed, and it quickly made its way through the state legislature. It was signed by Governor Henry McMaster on May 16, 2019, and went into effect that June, less than 3 months after Samantha's death. The act makes impersonating a rideshare driver a crime and requires rideshare vehicles to prominently display their license plate number on the front of their vehicle so that passengers do not have to walk behind the vehicle to check the plate number. On June 20, 2019, Governor Phil Murphy of Samantha's home state of New Jersey signed Sammy's Law, named in honor of Samantha. The law requires rideshare services to issue illuminated or reflective signs to their drivers who must display one sign in their windshield and one in their back window. Vehicles must also have scannable QR or barcodes as well as placards identifying the vehicle's driver. In October of 2019, Congressman Christopher Smith of New Jersey filed a federal version of Sammy's Law. The law would set up a digital system allowing rideshare passengers to verify a vehicle as their ride before entering it. In addition, it would also establish a 17-member board called Sammy's Council, which would report to the Secretary of Transportation to advance safety standards in the rideshare industry. It would also make it illegal to purchase or sell ride-sharing signage and require reports on the incidence of assaults on rideshare drivers and passengers, and on the background checks that drivers undergo to be generated. The law passed in the House of Representatives and arrived in the Senate in July of 2020, where it did not receive a vote. Sammy's Law was refiled in February of 2021. As Samantha's legacy makes an increasing impact on rideshare safety, her family does not want the memory of Samantha herself to be lost amongst all of the work being done in her name. We just want you to know that she is a fabulous young woman. Samantha's mother, Marcy, said of her in April of 2019, "Kind, a best friend to everyone, really determined, a hard worker and a fun young woman. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries." Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.